YouTube! So today I decided I want to talk about my experience with alcohol markers. As you can see, I have quite a collection of them. I have 3 different kinds. I have Copics, I have Winsor & Newton brush markers, and I have a really cheap brand that goes by the name of Ohuhu. Now I do try and use all of these, though I definitely do use the brush markers and the Copics a lot more than the Ohuhus, just because I finally have better color choices and the colors are a lot softer than the Ohuhus. So something I wanted to mention about alcohol markers is, if you're looking at them, one thing you need to keep in mind is that just because 2 markers have the same name does not mean they're the same color. This may seem like a kind of obvious kind of thing, but it's just something to keep in mind when you're looking at markers. So the first ones I'm testing are the Copic blush and the Winsor & Newton blush. So the Copic blush is very pink, while the Winsor & Newton blush is just kind of more of a peachy kind of color. It's more of a skin tone rather than very blushy, I guess. It's a very subtle blush, if anything. And the first one on this piece of paper, as you can see where I tested them, is the Copic one. And the second one is the Winsor & Newton one. Copic, or C for Copic, and WN for Winsor & Newton. So there you go. And the next 2 colors I'm going to be using is Putty. They're both called Putty, but one is the Winsor & Newton Putty, and the other one is the Ohuhu Putty. So the Winsor & Newton Putty just seems to be a very kind of like desaturated skin tone almost. It's a very desaturated brown. It's very light, while the Ohuhu Putty is very yellowy. It's very light yellow. So there's a pretty big difference between these 2, I think. And again, WN for Winsor & Newton for this one, and an O for the Ohuhus. Okay, and there they are. Okay, and so these markers, the Copic, brush marker, and Ohuhus all have chisel nibs, and as you can see, they all kind of vary in width and length and stuff. The Winsor & Newton brush markers are definitely the fattest chisel nib. And just to mention, out of these markers, the only one that isn't a brush marker are the Ohuhu markers. So I kind of wanted to talk about some pros and cons about markers that I've experienced. So the Copics, what I really like about them is they give down a very flat color, and they have a lot of desaturated tones to them, which is really helpful and really nice. It's something that I found lacking with the other 2 marker brands that I have. But one thing I don't really like about them is that when they're new, they tend to spit ink, which can be kind of a pain when you're trying to color a picture and then you end up with splotches of ink all over in places that you didn't exactly want color. So the next one is my Winsor & Newton brush markers. I really like these markers. They're a lot cheaper than the Copics. They're $5.99 or $4.99 compared to $7.99 that Copics are. One thing that I don't like about them as much is it's a lot harder to tell what color they are just from the little circle on the bottom where the brush marker is. It's a lot harder to tell from afar what color you're looking at and what color you're picking out. And another thing I don't like is that they don't have the names on the tips. They just have the numbered codes, which for the brush markers, I always find it a lot easier to remember colors by their names rather than Copics, where I find it a lot easier to remember them by the numbers, because the number convention for Copics I find to be a lot easier than the numbering convention for Winsor & Newton brush markers. I understand both of them, but the Winsor & Newton one is just a little bit more confusing than the Copic one, which is a little bit more straightforward. So next is my Ohuhu markers. These guys are super cheap. I can't really remember how much they were. They were a gift. But yeah, I didn't get to choose any of the markers. It was just a bunch of random ones. One thing I've noticed about these is the colors on the caps do not match the colors that the markers are at all. So this can be a bit of a pain when you're trying to create, and it makes it hard to just kind of be able to pick out a color and use it, which I need swatches for these definitely. I cannot tell the colors. And another thing to mention is they do bleed quite a bit, and the numbering convention, I don't get it. It's just random numbering. Okay, and this is the piece that I am going to be coloring today. I'm going to be using all three kinds of my markers. So this will kind of help you see how these markers lay down and how you can use them all together. So it doesn't really matter if you have just all Copics or if you have all brush markers or anything. You can mix and match all of your alcohol markers. And I find having a bunch of different brands very helpful due to the fact that one brand is not going to have all the colors you need. So something that I like to do is, I love my brush markers. They're not too expensive and they have a really nice laydown of color. But one thing I don't like about them is that they're non-refillable. So it's very hard when you run out of a color, or at least for me, it's very hard for me to replace a color because I have to order them online. There's no stores nearby me that sell brush markers in stores. The only store I can think of that's not even really all that close by is Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby carries them, but Michaels doesn't carry brush markers by me. And EC Moore doesn't carry Winsor & Newton Pro markers or their brush markers. Pro markers are just the chisel or the bullet nib version of the brush markers. But yeah, so with the Copics, the nice thing about them is that, again, they have softer tones, I feel, than brush markers. Brush markers have very vibrant colors, but Copics can get the more pastel-y tones. One thing I noticed about the first set of brush markers I got, which was the pastel set, was none of the colors were super pastel. They all kind of were a little bit, but they were still very vibrant with a lot of color. But the Copics, I find, have a lot more pastel tones, and with the numbering convention, it's a lot easier to tell which ones would be, or not even really numbering conventions, but the caps. You can tell which ones would be pastel tones. Out of the three markers, I think the caps for the Copics are the most accurate to the color that lays down on paper, while Winsor & Newton can be a bit iffy. It's not an exact match, but I do find that the Winsor & Newtons do match the colors on the paper. Maybe they're a little bit off, but I can tell just by looking at the marker. I can estimate what the marker tone is going to come out as, even though it may come out a little bit darker than I may expect. And yeah, so a little bit about my picture today. I'm coloring in my OC. Her name is Estelle. She's the one with the blue hair. If you've seen any of my other videos, you've seen her before. And for this video, I really did want to talk about my experience with brush marker, just alcohol markers, just because I know a lot of people want other people's opinions on these markers before going out and buying them themselves. So getting alcohol markers is a huge investment. So getting like Crayola markers, you can get a lot for $7.99. Well, you can only get one Copic for $7.99. So that's kind of what I kind of want to bring up. It's a very big decision, so I think it's very important for you to get many different people's opinions on the markers before you end up making this choice and going ahead with buying the markers and deciding what markers you're going to get. So one thing I would recommend is starting off with some cheaper markers instead of going straight for the Copics. Now, I do have a couple of Copics, but I don't buy them all the time. I only buy them when they're on sale, pretty much. The only time I've really ever bought them is when I'm at Michael's and I have a 50% off coupon. And then I'll use the 50% off coupon to get them. And still, it's a pretty hefty price. I've been buying the big pack, like the 6-packs, and it's been pretty expensive. Well, I started off with the brush markers because they are a cheaper alternative than the Copics, but the only problem with the brush markers, for me at least, is it's very hard for me to find them anywhere near me. It's a lot easier for me to find pro markers, actually, because they sell pro markers in Michael's. Buying a big set like the blue markers gives you a lot of markers to just kind of work around with. You can get them and you already have a big set of markers. You can't do a lot with just a couple of markers, so this is why I think it's very important to think about what markers you're going to get and why. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Bye!